The baby shower invitation arrived on cream-colored cardstock with gold embossed letters, the kind of stationery that screamed expensive taste and careful planning. Join us in celebrating Baby Chen, it read, with my sister Victoria's name printed in elegant script below. My name wasn't on it, not as a co-host, not as family, just squeezed onto the guest list like an afterthought. I should have known then what kind of day it was going to be. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The country club smelled like fresh lilies and privilege. White linens draped every surface, pink and gold balloons clustered in perfect arrangements, and servers in pressed uniforms glided between tables carrying silver trays of delicate finger foods. Victoria had outdone herself, or rather, she'd outdone Dad's credit card. Everything screamed perfection, from the cascading floral centerpieces to the hand-calligraphed place cards that somehow managed to seat me at the table furthest from the guest of honor. I smoothed my navy blazer and checked my reflection in the bathroom mirror before joining the festivities. The woman staring back at me looked tired. Dark circles shadowed my brown eyes, and my black hair was pulled back in the same simple bun I'd worn for years. Nothing flashy, nothing that drew attention. That was by design. "Sophia, you made it!" Victoria's voice rang out across the room as I entered. She was radiant in a flowing pink dress that perfectly complemented her pregnancy glow, her hands resting protectively over her rounded belly. At 7 months pregnant with her first child, she commanded attention effortlessly, just like she always had. I walked over to congratulate her, but before I could speak, Dad appeared at her side like a protective shield. James Chen, successful real estate developer, community pillar, and the kind of man who measured worth in visible achievements and social status. "Sophia," he said curtly, barely glancing in my direction. "Surprised you could take time off from your desk job to be here." The words hit like a familiar slap. Desk job. That's what he called it, what the whole family called it. Government work, filing reports, pushing paper. Nothing glamorous, nothing worth bragging about at his weekly golf games or charity dinners. "Of course I'd be here for Victoria," I replied evenly. "Congratulations on becoming a grandfather." He smiled, but it wasn't for me. It was for the grandson on the way, for Victoria's husband Marcus, who worked in finance, for the perfect nuclear family they were creating. Everything he'd wanted from his daughters, and everything I'd apparently failed to provide. "Marcus is already talking about setting up a college fund," Dad continued, his chest puffing with pride. "Yale, like his father. The boy will have every advantage, real opportunities, not just government benefits and pension plans." I nodded politely, swallowing the words that wanted to escape. If only he knew what those government benefits actually covered. If only he understood that the pension he dismissed so casually came with hazard pay and classifications levels he couldn't imagine. Victoria took my arm gently, steering me away from Dad's judgment. "Come meet my friends from the Junior League," she said, though her smile seemed forced. "They're dying to hear what you do." What I did. The question that haunted every family gathering, every social interaction, every moment when I had to explain why a 34-year-old woman with 2 degrees and a security clearance higher than most senators spent her days filing paperwork for the Department of Defense. The Junior League ladies were exactly what I expected. Perfectly styled hair, designer handbags, diamond rings that caught the light as they gestured with manicured hands. They clustered around Victoria like satellites orbiting a star, each one trying to outdo the others with baby advice and gift suggestions. "And this is my sister Sophia," Victoria said, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she had to explain me the people. "She works for the government in D.C. "Oh, how interesting!" A blonde woman in pearls leaned forward eagerly. "Are you in politics? Do you work on Capitol Hill?" "Not exactly," I said carefully. "More behind-the-scenes administrative work." The light in her eyes dimmed immediately. Administrative work was code for boring, for unimportant, for the kind of job people took when they couldn't do anything better. "Well, that's stable," another woman offered kindly, the way you might compliment someone's homemade cookies when they clearly came from a box mix. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment away from the suffocating weight of their pity and Dad's disappointment. In the mirror, I looked the same as always, unremarkable, forgettable, the kind of person who blended into backgrounds and disappeared in crowds. It was a carefully cultivated appearance, one that had served me well in ways these women would never understand. When I returned to the main room, the gift opening had begun. Victoria sat in an ornate chair decorated with ribbons and flowers, surrounded by a mountain of perfectly wrapped presents. Each gift was accompanied by squeals of delight, careful photography for social media, and effusive thanks to the giver. I watched from my assigned table as she opened baby clothes from Nordstrom, nursery decor from Pottery Barn, and a stroller that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Dad beamed with pride, taking pictures and making jokes about spoiling his future grandson. Marcus recorded everything on his phone, already the devoted father-to-be. My gift sat near the bottom of the pile, wrapped in simple blue paper from the drugstore. Inside was a small silver frame with baby's first photo engraved at the bottom. Nothing extravagant, nothing that would generate Instagram-worthy excitement, but something meaningful that would last. "From Aunt Sophia," Victoria read aloud when she finally reached it. She held up the frame politely, smiled for the cameras, and set it aside with the other practical gifts that wouldn't make the thank you photo collage. "That's thoughtful," Mom said from her position near the gift table. Linda Chen, former nurse turned full-time society wife, had perfected the art of the diplomatic non-compliment. Very practical. Practical. The word followed me everywhere, like a brand burned into my forehead. Sophia, the practical one. Sophia, the sensible one. Sophia, who would never give them anything exciting to talk about. The conversation around my table had turned to careers and achievements. Sarah Martinez, a pediatric surgeon, was describing her latest case. Jennifer Wu, a partner at a law firm downtown, shared news about her recent courtroom victory. Amanda Foster, who owned a chain of boutique fitness studios, talked about expanding to the West Coast. "What about you, Sophia?"
Sarah asked politely. "What's new in your world?" I considered my options. I could tell them about the late nights I'd spent this month analyzing satellite imagery from Eastern Europe, tracking weapons shipments that could destabilize entire regions. I could mention the encrypted communications I'd decoded that prevented a terrorist attack in London last year. I could describe the counterintelligence operation I've been running for 6 months that had just uncovered a spy ring operating out of 3 major universities. Instead, I smiled and said, "Same old routine, reports, meetings, deadlines." They nodded sympathetically and moved on to more interesting topics. After the gifts came the games. Baby shower bingo, guess the baby food flavor, and that terrible one where you measure the circumference of the pregnant woman's belly with toilet paper. I participated dutifully, lost spectacularly, and watched everyone else shriek with laughter at each ridiculous challenge. During a break between activities, I found myself alone on the club's terrace, looking out over the manicured golf course. The afternoon sun was warm on my face, and for a moment, I could almost forget the weight of everyone's expectations and disappointments. Not enjoying the party? I turned to find Marcus approaching with 2 glasses of punch. Victoria's husband was a good man, kind and steady, the type who remembered birthdays and never forgot to call his mother. He'd been nothing but welcoming to me since he and Victoria started dating, which made his presence both comforting and guilt-inducing. "It's a beautiful party," I said, accepting the drink gratefully. Victoria planned everything perfectly. "She did," he agreed, settling into a chair beside me. "Though she's been stressed about it for weeks. Wants everything to be perfect for the baby, you know?" I did know. Victoria had always been a perfectionist, always the star of every show. Valedictorian in high school, summa cum laude at Duke, successful marketing executive before she decided to focus on starting a family. Everything she touched turned to gold, while I seemed to specialize in invisible achievements that no one could see or understand. "She talks about you a lot," Marcus said unexpectedly. "Worries about you living alone in D.C., working so hard. She wishes you two were closer." The comment caught me off guard. Victoria worried about me? The golden child who had everything? The perfect husband, the perfect pregnancy, the perfect life? Worried about her disappointing sister? I'm fine, I said automatically. Work keeps me busy, but I like where I do. What exactly do you do? Marcus asked, and for once, the question didn't feel like a judgment. It felt like genuine curiosity. I gave him my standard answer about administrative work and government contracts, watching his face for the familiar glaze of boredom that usually followed. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. Must be important work if it keeps you so busy. Victoria mentioned you missed Christmas last year because of a work emergency. Christmas. The emergency had been a hostage situation in Somalia that required round-the-clock monitoring and coordination with international forces. I'd spent 48 straight hours in a windowless room helping to orchestrate a rescue mission that saved 17 aid workers and made headlines for exactly one news cycle before the world moved on to the next crisis. Sometimes things come up, I said simply. Before Marcus could ask more questions, Victoria appeared in the doorway. There you are, she called out, one hand supporting her back. We're about to do the cake cutting. Marcus, can you help me with the speech? As they headed back inside, I lingered on the terrace for another moment. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the golf course. In a few hours, this perfect afternoon would be over. Victoria would go home to her beautiful house and devoted husband. Mom and Dad would return to their retirement community where they spent their days playing tennis and bridge. And I would drive back to my empty apartment in Arlington, where the only sound would be the hum of encrypted phones and the weight of secrets I could never share. The cake cutting was a production worthy of a wedding, a 3-tiered masterpiece decorated with pink and gold roses, tiny baby booties made of fondant, and "Welcome Baby Chen" written in elegant script across the top. Victoria posed for photos with the knife, Marcus's hand covering hers, both of them glowing with happiness. Dad stood behind them, his chest puffed with pride as he prepared to give his toast. This was his moment. His chance to celebrate the family legacy and the bright future ahead. Friends, family, thank you all for being here today. He began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. Linda and I are so proud of Victoria and Marcus, and we can't wait to meet our grandson. Applause rippled through the room. Victoria beamed, radiant in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Victoria has always been our star, Dad continued, his smile warm and genuine. From the day she was born, we knew she was destined for great things. Captain of the debate team, student body president, top of her class at Duke. She's built a beautiful life with Marcus, and now she's giving us the greatest gift of all, the next generation of the Chen family. Applause louder this time. I clapped politely, my smile fixed in place, my hands steady on my punch glass, my breathing controlled. Years of high-stakes situations had taught me to compartmentalize, to lock away emotions that could compromise a mission. But this wasn't a mission. This was my family, and the dismissal cut deeper than any professional slight ever could. To Victoria, Marcus, and Baby Chen, may your future be bright and full of love. Dad raised his glass high. Cheers, the room responded in unison. I raised my glass with everyone else, took a sip of the overly sweet punch, and applauded as Victoria and Marcus shared a kiss over their perfect cake. Around me, the celebration continued with renewed energy, but I felt like I was watching it through bulletproof glass. Present but not participating, seen but not valued. Victoria caught my eye across the room and offered a small apologetic smile. She'd heard Dad's comment, understood the slight, and felt bad about it.
But she didn't say anything, didn't correct him or defend me. She was pregnant and happy and celebrating, and I was just going to have to deal with it like I always did. The party began winding down as the sun set outside the club's elegant windows. Guests offered final congratulations, collected their party favors, small bags of gourmet chocolates tied with pink ribbons, and made their way to the valet stand. Victoria held court near the gift table, accepting hugs and well wishes from her junior league friends.
I helped Mom load gifts into Marcus's SUV, stacking boxes of baby clothes and nursery decorations with mechanical efficiency. My silver frame had made it into the car, buried somewhere in the middle of the pile between a diaper bag and a mobile shaped like hot air balloons. "Thank you for coming, Sophia," Victoria said as I prepared to leave. She looked tired now, the strain of the afternoon showing in the slight droop of her shoulders and the shadows under her eyes. "Of course," I replied, giving her a careful hug that avoided putting pressure on her belly. "It was a beautiful party. You did an amazing job." "I'm sorry about Dad's comment," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one could overhear us. "You know how he gets sometimes." I did know. James Chan was a man of the old school, someone who believed success came in recognizable packages, corner offices, country club memberships, sons-in-law with impressive job titles. My government work didn't fit his definition of achievement, so it must not be achievement at all. "It's fine," I said, because what else was there to say? "I hope everything goes smoothly with the rest of your pregnancy." "Will you be able to come for the birth?" Victoria asked. "I know your schedule is unpredictable, but it would mean a lot to have you there." I thought about my calendar, the missions already scheduled for the next 3 months, the operations that could run long or require immediate travel to classified locations. There was no way to predict where I'd be when Victoria went into labor, no way to guarantee I'd be available for another family milestone. "I'll do my best," I said, which was all I could promise. Victoria nodded, understanding more than she probably realized. She'd grown up watching me miss birthday parties, school plays, and family vacations because of work commitments that I could never fully explain. She was used to my absences, even if she didn't understand their necessity. I hugged Mom and Dad goodbye, endured another comment about my little job from Dad, and walked to the valet stand where my car was waiting. It was a 5-year-old Honda Civic, practical and unremarkable, the kind of vehicle that could sit in any parking lot for hours without attracting attention. As I drove away from the country club, I caught a glimpse of Victoria in my rear-view mirror. She was standing in the doorway, one hand on her belly, surrounded by the golden light of the lobby. She looked like a magazine cover, like everything a daughter should be. I wondered, not for the first time, what my life would have been like if I'd followed her path. If I'd stayed in Charlotte after college, found a nice local job, married someone Dad approved of, started having babies by now, would I be happier? Would I feel like I belonged somewhere instead of floating in the spaces between secrets? But as soon as the thought formed, I pushed it away. I'd chosen this life for a reason. I'd chosen it the day I sat in a career fair and a recruiter in a plain gray suit had asked me if I wanted to serve my country in ways most people would never know about. I'd chosen it when I'd scored in the 99th percentile on the security clearance psychological evaluation. I'd chosen it every day since, every time I'd prioritized the mission over personal comfort. The drive back to D.C. took 2 hours through Virginia countryside that was just beginning to show hints of spring. Cherry trees lined the highway, their branches heavy with blossoms that would be gone in another week. I drove in silence, letting my mind process the afternoon's events and file them away in the mental compartment reserved for family disappointments. My phone buzzed as I reached the Arlington exit. The display showed an encrypted number I recognized immediately, my direct line to Central Command. I pulled into a gas station parking lot and answered on the second ring. "Colonel Chen?" "Colonel, this is Major Patterson at CENTCOM. We have a situation developing in the Gulf. How quickly can you get to the Pentagon?" I checked my watch. It was 8:47 p.m. on a Sunday evening. Most people would be settling in for the night, maybe watching a movie or preparing for the work week ahead. Most people weren't responsible for monitoring global threats that could escalate into international incidents within hours. "I can be there in 30 minutes. "Copy that. Report to SCIF-7 when you arrive. This is Priority Alpha." Priority Alpha, the designation that meant everything else stopped, everything else waited. I'd heard it 17 times in my career, and each time it had meant days or weeks of my life consumed by a crisis most of the world would never hear about. I ended the call and pulled back onto the highway, my mind already shifting from family disappointment to operational focus. Whatever was happening in the Gulf, it was serious enough to pull me in on a Sunday night. That meant satellite intelligence, encrypted communications, and the kind of problem-solving that happened in windowless rooms filled with people who understood that some victories could never be celebrated publicly. As I drove toward the Pentagon, I thought about Victoria's baby shower, about Dad's dismissive comments and the polite sympathy of the junior league wives. They saw a woman who pushed paper and lived alone, someone who chose career stability over a real life. They had no idea that in 30 minutes, I'd be walking into a room where decisions get made that could affect the safety of millions of people. They thought I was worthless, a disappointment, the daughter who would never amount to anything important. Tomorrow, they might wake up to a world that was a little bit safer because of work I'd do tonight, decisions I'd help make, intelligence I'd help analyze and act upon. They'd never know. They'd never understand. And maybe that was exactly as it should be. But as I pulled into the Pentagon parking garage and showed my credentials to the security guard, I couldn't shake the memory of Dad's words. Even Sophia managed to take time off from her paperwork to be with us. Paperwork. If only he knew what kind of papers I was about to push. SCIF-7 was buried 3 levels beneath the Pentagon's main floor, accessible only through a series of security checkpoints that would make airport screening look casual. My heels clicked against polished concrete as I made my way through corridors that never saw natural light, past doors marked with codes instead of names. The air smelled like recycled oxygen, and the faint ozone scent that always lingered around high-security electronic equipment. The secure compartmented information facility was exactly what its name suggested, a room within a room, wrapped in copper mesh and concrete thick enough to stop both bullets and electronic surveillance. When the heavy steel door sealed shut behind me with a soft pneumatic hiss, the outside world simply ceased to exist. 6 people were already seated around the oval conference table when I arrived, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of multiple computer screens. I recognized most of them: Major General Patricia Williams from the Joint Chiefs, Commander Rick Torres from Naval Intelligence, Dr. Elena Vasquez from the Defense Intelligence Agency, and 3 analysts whose names I knew but whose faces rarely appeared in official photographs. "Colonel Chen, thank you for getting here so quickly," General Williams said without looking up from her satellite imagery spread across her tablet. "We have a situation in the Gulf of Hormuz that's escalating faster than anyone anticipated." I took my seat and activated the secure terminal built into the table. Immediately, classified intelligence reports began flooding my screen. Ship movements, intercepted communications, thermal imaging from military satellites positioned 22,000 miles above the Persian Gulf.
The kind of real-time data that cost millions of dollars to collect and could be worth billions in prevented catastrophe. "What's the current assessment?" I asked, my fingers already moving across the interface to pull up regional threat analyses. Commander Torres leaned forward, his weathered face grim. 3 Iranian fast attack boats approached a Panamanian flag tanker approximately 6 hours ago. They forced it to change course toward Iranian territorial waters. The tanker's carrying liquefied natural gas bound for Japan. On the screen, a digital map showed the ship's altered trajectory as a red line cutting across international shipping lanes. The original route appeared in blue, a path that would have taken it safely through international waters and away from potential confrontation. "Any communication from the Iranian vessels?" I asked. "That's where it gets interesting," Dr. Vasquez replied, her voice carrying the careful precision of someone who'd spent years analyzing the subtleties of international crises. "We intercepted radio chatters suggesting this wasn't a planned operation. The boat commanders seemed to be operating under orders they received less than 2 hours ago." I pulled up the communication intercepts on my screen, scanning the translated transcripts. The language was rushed, uncertain, with repeated requests for clarification from higher command. This had all the hallmarks of a reactive operation, not a premeditated attack. "What triggered the response?" I asked. General Williams swiped across her tablet, bringing up a new set of images. This did. The satellite photos showed what appeared to be a small flotilla of vessels moving through international waters approximately 50 nautical miles from the Iranian coast. The ships were flying American flags, but something about their formation and positioning sent alarm bells ringing in my head. USS Hampton and USS Charlotte, Williams continued, naming the two Los Angeles-class submarines that formed the backbone of the flotilla. They were conducting routine patrol operations when sensors detected what appeared to be Iranian submarine activity in the area. I studied the tactical display more carefully, noting the positions of various vessels and the timing of their movements. Our submarines moved to intercept? Negative, Commander Torres replied. They maintained course and speed but switched to active sonar to get a better picture of what they were dealing with. Standard operating procedure. Active sonar. The underwater equivalent of shining a spotlight into someone's backyard. Technically legal in international waters, but the kind of thing that could be interpreted as aggressive, depending on the political climate. Iranian response, I asked, though I was already beginning to see the pattern. Within 30 minutes, they had fast attack boats moving to intercept the closest civilian vessel, Dr. Vasquez said. Classic asymmetric escalation. They can't challenge our submarines directly, so they create a hostage situation that forces us to back down. The psychology was textbook, but the execution was sloppy. I pulled up the profiles of the Iranian naval commanders likely to be involved in this operation. Most were experienced officers who would normally plan something like this more carefully, with better coordination and clearer exit strategies. Something's not adding up, I said, highlighting discrepancies in the timeline. This feels reactive, almost panicked. What aren't we seeing? General Williams exchanged glances with Commander Torres. That's what we need you to figure out. We've got a tanker with 40 crew members being forced into Iranian waters, 2 of our submarines trying to maintain position without escalating further, and diplomatic channels that won't be open until morning. If this goes wrong, we could be looking at an international incident that makes the evening news and congressional hearings. Or worse. I didn't need to voice what we were all thinking. A single mistake, one misinterpreted signal or nervous finger on a trigger could turn this into the kind of crisis that launched wars. I began pulling up background intelligence on recent Iranian military activities, cross-referencing ship movements with known personnel assignments and recent changes in command structure. Somewhere in the data would be the key to understanding why experienced naval officers were suddenly acting like amateurs. Dr. Vasquez, what's our intelligence on Iranian submarine capabilities in this region? I asked. She pulled up a classified assessment that painted a picture of aging Soviet-era vessels with limited operational range and questionable maintenance records. They've got 3 Kilo-class subs theoretically capable of operating in the area, but only one has been confirmed seaworthy in the past 6 months. And that boat's current status? Unknown. Lost track of it 4 days ago when it left port in Bandar Abbas. 4 days. I felt the first stirring of understanding, the way puzzle pieces began clicking together when you finally found the right corner to start from. Commander Torres, when exactly did our submarines switch to active sonar? He consulted his notes. 1347 hours local time. And the Iranian response began when? First fast attack boat moved at 1423 hours. 36 minutes. Too fast for a planned response, but exactly the right timeline for someone who was already nervous and jumped at the first sign of American military activity. I opened a new analysis window and began mapping submarine patrol routes against known Iranian listening posts. The picture that emerged was troubling, but not surprising. Our routine patrol had taken the Hampton and Charlotte directly through an area where the Iranians had been expecting their missing submarine to surface for scheduled communications. I think I know what happened, I said, highlighting key positions on the tactical display. The Iranians lost contact with one of their submarines 4 days ago. They've been conducting search operations, probably assuming the worst. When our submarines switched to active sonar in the same general area, Iranian command assumed we'd located and were tracking their missing submarine. General Williams leaned back in her chair, processing the implications. So this isn't about aggression, it's about embarrassment. And fear, I added. If they think we found their submarine, they're worried about what else we might have discovered. Equipment failures, navigation errors, crew competency issues, the kind of intelligence that could compromise their entire submarine program. The room fell silent as everyone considered the ramifications. A planned attack was one thing. It could be met with measured diplomatic response and proportional military pressure. But a panic reaction based on misunderstanding was far more dangerous because it meant rational actors were making irrational decisions. Option.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, General Williams asked. I pulled up a new screen and began outlining potential responses. We need to de-escalate without appearing weak, which means giving the Iranians a face-saving way to release the tanker while addressing their underlying concerns about their missing submarine. And how do we do that without revealing our intelligence capabilities? It was the eternal challenge of my job, using information to solve problems without revealing how we'd obtained that information in the first place. Sources and methods were often more valuable than the intelligence itself, and protecting them sometimes meant accepting suboptimal outcomes. We offered to help, I said simply. Maritime search and rescue in international waters. We position it as humanitarian assistance, not intelligence gathering. Commander Torres frowned. They'll never accept help finding their own submarine. They will if we frame it correctly. Iranian naval vessel missing in heavy shipping traffic, potential environmental hazard from fuel or equipment, international maritime law requiring assistance to vessels in distress. We make it about safety, not military capability. Dr. Vasquez was already running numbers on her tablet, calculating response times and resource requirements. We'd need to coordinate with Coast Guard assets, bring in some civilian contractors to make it look less military. Could take 6 hours to put the pieces in place. The tanker doesn't have 6 hours, General Williams pointed out. Current course and speed puts them inside Iranian territorial waters in less than 4. I studied the tactical display again, looking for options that didn't require perfect timing or diplomatic miracles. Sometimes the best solutions were the simplest ones, the approaches that relied on human nature rather than complex strategy. What if we give them what they're really afraid of losing? I asked. Meaning? Dignity, respect, the appearance that they're still in control of their own waters. I began sketching out a communication strategy on the shared display. We have our submarines surface and announce routine maintenance checks, completely transparent, non-threatening, the kind of thing that happens every day. Meanwhile, we broadcast a general navigation warning about potential underwater hazards in the area. General Williams was beginning to nod. So we're not searching for their submarine. We're just being careful mariners sharing safety information. Exactly. And if their submarine happens to be located during our routine maintenance, it's just good luck and international cooperation. They can claim credit for requesting assistance, we can claim credit for providing it, and everyone goes home looking competent. The plan wasn't perfect, but it had the advantage of being simple enough to execute quickly and face-saving enough to give the Iranians room to back down gracefully. Sometimes that was the best you could hope for in international relations, mutual face-saving disguised as cooperation. Timeline? General Williams asked. I consulted the mission clock in the corner of my screen. 15 minutes to draft the communications, 30 minutes to coordinate with submarine commanders, another 15 to begin implementation. The tanker will still be in international waters when we start, which gives the Iranians cover to claim they were just providing escort services. And if they don't take the bait? That was always the question that haunted these operations. What happened when reasonable people refused to be reasonable? When face-saving opportunities were rejected in favor of doubling down on poor decisions? I'd seen it happen before. Watched carefully crafted diplomatic solutions collapse because someone's prime was worth more than peace. Then we moved to more direct options, I said simply. But let's try subtle first. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in precision communication and real-time crisis management. Every word of every message was carefully crafted to provide maximum face-saving opportunity while maintaining firm positions on key issues.
Radio frequencies were monitored in 6 languages, satellite imagery was analyzed frame by frame, and diplomatic channels were quietly activated to ensure everyone understood the stakes involved. I coordinated with submarine commanders who had to balance military readiness with diplomatic sensitivity, with intelligence analysts who needed to provide real-time updates without revealing collection methods, and with senior officials who would ultimately be held responsible if the situation escalated into armed conflict. At 22:47 hours, the breakthrough came. "Colonel, we're getting communication from the Iranian fast attack boats," Dr. Vasquez announced. "They're requesting clarification on the navigation warning we broadcast." I pulled up the intercept on my screen. The Iranian commander was using formal military protocol, asking for specific coordinates and hazard descriptions. It was the first indication that they were looking for a way out of the corner they'd painted themselves into. "Response?" asked General Williams. I drafted a careful reply that provided just enough information to be helpful without revealing how much we actually knew. Coordinates were given in general terms, hazard descriptions were suitably vague, and everything was framed in the language of international maritime safety rather than military intelligence. "Send it," I said. 23 minutes later, our satellites showed the Iranian fast attack boats changing course. Instead of escorting the tanker toward Iranian waters, they were forming a search pattern around the coordinates we'd provided. The tanker continued on its original course, no longer under duress. "They're buying it," Commander Torres said with evident relief. But I wasn't ready to relax yet. The immediate crisis was de-escalating, but the underlying problem, the missing Iranian submarine, remained unresolved. Until that boat was located and accounted for, the potential for misunderstanding and renewed escalation remained high. "How long before we can get search assets in the water?" I asked. "Coast Guard cutter is 4 hours out, but we've got an oceanographic survey vessel about 90 minutes away. Civilian crew, but they're carrying some sophisticated sonar equipment." "Perfect. Let's get them moving toward the search area. Full transparency, broadcast their intentions and capabilities, make sure everyone knows they're civilian researchers helping with maritime safety." As the crisis shifted from immediate danger to long-term management, I found myself thinking about perception versus reality, about the difference between what people thought they understood and what was actually happening. The Iranian commanders had misinterpreted routine American naval operations as a threat to their national security. My family had misinterpreted my career as pushing meaningless paperwork instead of managing global crises. Both misunderstandings had consequences, though obviously at very different scales. The encrypted phone in my pocket buzzed with a text message. I glanced at the screen and saw Victoria's name. "Thank you for coming today.
I know Dad can be difficult sometimes. The baby is lucky to have an aunt who serves her country, even if we don't always understand how." The phrase captured everything about my relationship with my family, the gulf between their perception of my life and the reality of what I actually did. Victoria was trying to be supportive, but the message revealed how little she truly understood about the nature of my work. I was about to put the phone away when another message arrived, this one from my mother. "Sophia, your father didn't mean anything by his comment today. You know how proud we are of your government job. Hope you're not working too late tonight." My government job. As if the entire United States military intelligence apparatus was just another career path, like accounting or marketing. As if the decisions being made in this room tonight wouldn't ripple across international relations for months or years to come. But that was the point, wasn't it? The best intelligence work was invisible, successful precisely because it prevented crises that the public never learned about. My family's ignorance of what I actually did was proof that I was doing it correctly. "Colonel, we've got positive contact on the missing submarine," Dr. Vasquez announced, breaking into my thoughts. The main screen displayed sonar imagery from the civilian research vessel, showing the distinctive outline of a Kilo-class submarine resting on the ocean floor approximately 200 feet below the surface. The boat appeared intact but motionless, suggesting either mechanical failure or crew incapacitation. "Depth and accessibility?" I asked. "Within range of Iranian salvage capabilities, assuming they have the right equipment. The question is whether they want our help bringing it up or prefer to handle it themselves."
It was a delicate moment. Offering too much assistance might be seen as intelligence gathering disguised as humanitarian aid. Offering too little might leave Iranian sailors to die while their government struggled with questions of national pride. Draft a message offering technical consultation only, I decided. Make it clear we're not proposing to actually salvage the vessel, just providing expertise if they want it. Their boat, their crew, their operation. The response came back within an hour. The Iranians accepted the technical consultation, but declined direct salvage assistance. It was exactly the face-saving compromise we'd hoped for. They maintained control of their submarine and their national dignity, while we ensured the crew received the best possible chance of survival. Over the next 6 hours, I coordinated a complex international rescue operation that existed in the spaces between military intelligence and humanitarian assistance. Iranian salvage ships worked alongside American technical advisors, civilian research vessels provided sonar guidance, while military submarines maintained discreet overwatch, and diplomatic channels hummed with carefully worded updates designed to prevent misunderstanding. At 0847 hours, the Iranian submarine broke the surface under its own power, its crew battered but alive. Mechanical failure had disabled their navigation and communication systems, leaving them stranded on the ocean floor while air supplies dwindled. Without the search operation that had grown out of the tanker crisis, they would have died in darkness and silence. Mission success, General Williams announced as the last of the Iranian vessels cleared the area. Tanker is proceeding on its original course, submarine crew is safe, and diplomatic relations are actually better than they were 12 hours ago. I nodded, already beginning to mentally file the operation away in the compartment of my mind reserved for successful missions. Tomorrow, there would be detailed after-action reports, diplomatic debriefings, and intelligence assessments that would be read by senior officials and filed in archives that might not be declassified for decades. But tonight, 40 tanker crew members were continuing their journey to Japan. 18 Iranian sailors were breathing fresh air instead of dying in a metal tomb. And a potential international crisis had been resolved without a single shot being fired. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Victoria. Hope your work emergency wasn't too serious. Try to get some sleep. Work emergency. If she only knew that her little sister had just spent the night preventing a naval confrontation that could have triggered an international incident, coordinating a submarine rescue operation that saved 18 lives, and managing diplomatic communications that kept 2 nuclear-armed nations from stumbling into a conflict over a misunderstanding. But Victoria would never know. None of them would. Tomorrow's news cycle would mention the successful rescue of an Iranian submarine crew by international maritime cooperation, with no details about how that cooperation had been engineered or what crisis had been prevented in the process. Dad would read about it over his morning coffee and maybe make some dismissive comment about foreign naval incompetence. Mom would shake her head at the dangers of military service and be grateful her daughters had chosen safer careers. Victoria would focus on her pregnancy and preparing for motherhood, secure in her belief that the world was a basically safe place where international crises were handled by important people she'd never met. And I would go home to my empty apartment, catch a few hours of sleep, and wait for the next crisis that needed managing, the next problem that required solutions most people could never imagine. As I gathered my classified materials and prepared to leave Skiff 7, General Williams caught my attention. Outstanding work tonight, Colonel. The Joint Chiefs will want a full briefing tomorrow, but I wanted you to know that your analysis was spot on. Without that insight about Iranian motivations, this could have gone very differently. Thank you, ma'am. Just glad we could find a solution that worked for everyone. That's what separates good intelligence officers from great ones. Anyone can identify a problem. It takes real skill to engineer solutions that let everyone involved claim victory. I walked back through the Pentagon's corridors in the early morning darkness, past the same security checkpoints and unmarked doors I'd navigated 12 hours earlier. The building was quieter now, staffed mostly by night shift personnel, and the occasional officer pulling an all-nighter on some classified project. My footsteps echoed in the empty hallways as I made my way to the parking garage. The sound reminded me of walking through the country club after Victoria's baby shower, leaving behind a world where I didn't quite fit, and returning to the work that gave my life meaning. But as I drove through the empty streets of Arlington, I found myself thinking about family dynamics and the strange parallels between international relations and personal relations. The Iranians had misunderstood American intentions and nearly created a crisis. My family misunderstood my career and created a different kind of tension. Both situations involve people operating on incomplete information and making assumptions that served their own psychological needs rather than reflecting actual reality. I couldn't exactly invite my parents into a secure compartmented information facility and show them satellite imagery of the operations I'd managed. I couldn't explain the real stakes of my work without violating classification levels that existed for very good reasons. And even if I could share everything, would it change their fundamental perception of who I was and what I'd chosen to do with my life? As I pulled into my apartment complex parking lot, I realized that the answer probably didn't matter. Victoria's baby would be born into a world that was marginally safer because of work done by people whose names would never appear in history books. Dad would continue believing that visible success was the only success worth having. Mom would keep worrying about my unmarried status and empty apartment. And I would keep serving my country in ways they couldn't understand, protecting a world that included their comfortable suburban lives and country club baby showers. It wasn't the recognition I'd once hoped for, but it was something more valuable. The quiet satisfaction of work that mattered, even when no one else could see it. My phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, most from family members asking if I was okay, if the work emergency had been resolved, if I needed anything. Victoria had sent a photo from the hospital. Apparently, the excitement of the baby shower had triggered some early contractions, though everything turned out to be fine. I texted her back that the work situation was resolved and that I was glad she and the baby were okay. Then I turned off the phone, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat in the darkness of my living room, watching the sun rise over the Washington, D.C. skyline. Somewhere in the Persian Gulf, an Iranian submarine was limping back to port with a crew grateful to be alive.
Somewhere in the Pacific, a tanker full of liquefied natural gas was continuing its journey to Japan. Somewhere in the corridors of power, senior officials were reading briefing reports about a crisis that had been resolved before most people knew it existed. And somewhere in Charlotte, North Carolina, my family was probably having breakfast and planning their week, secure in their belief that the world was a predictable place where the biggest threats were stock market fluctuations and social media drama. They had no idea that their disappointing daughter had just helped save 18 lives and prevent an international incident. They never would have any idea. And maybe, I thought as I finally headed to bed, that was exactly as it should be. The best victories were the ones no one else had to worry about. 3 weeks later, I was reviewing intelligence reports on North Korean missile tests when my secure phone rang with a number I didn't immediately recognize. The caller ID showed a Pentagon extension, but not one from my usual chain of command. Colonel Chen, this is Admiral Rebecca Morrison's office. The Admiral requests your presence at a briefing this afternoon at 1400 hours. Building location and clearance details are being sent to your classified email now. Admiral Morrison. I knew the name, but had never worked directly with her. She was the Navy's Deputy Chief of Information Operations, the kind of flag officer who moved in circles well above my usual operational level. Getting summoned to brief someone of her rank usually meant either very good news or very bad news, with little middle ground between the two possibilities. The briefing location turned out to be a conference room I'd never seen before, tucked away in a section of the Pentagon that required additional security clearances beyond my normal access. 2 Marines in dress blues flanked the entrance, checking identification with the kind of thoroughness that suggested whatever was happening inside carried significant weight. Admiral Morrison was younger than I'd expected, maybe 50, with steel gray hair pulled back in a regulation bun and the kind of bearing that suggested she'd earned her stars through competence rather than politics. She stood as I entered, returning my salute with crisp precision. Colonel Chen, thank you for coming. Please, have a seat. The conference room was spartanly furnished, but equipped with the latest secure communication technology. Multiple screens lined the walls, currently dark, and the conference table held tablets that would undoubtedly contain classified briefing materials once activated. Admiral, how can I assist you today? I asked, settling into the chair she'd indicated. I understand you handled the Persian Gulf situation 3 weeks ago with considerable skill, she said, consulting a file that I couldn't read from my angle. The Joint Chiefs were impressed with your analysis and crisis management approach. Thank you, ma'am. The team worked very effectively together. Indeed, they did. But what interests me more is how you identified the psychological factors driving Iranian decision-making. That kind of insight doesn't come from satellite imagery or signals intelligence. It requires a deeper understanding of human nature and organizational dynamics. I waited, knowing she was building towards something, but uncertain what direction the conversation would take. Admiral Morrison activated one of the wall screens, displaying what appeared to be a world map marked with colored symbols indicating various military installations and operational areas. Colonel, are you familiar with the International Military Leadership Symposium? The name was vaguely familiar from intelligence briefings, but I'd never been directly involved. I know it exists, ma'am, but I'm not familiar with the details. It's an annual gathering of senior military officers from NATO allies and strategic partners. This year's focus is on crisis de-escalation and international cooperation in complex security environments, the kind of challenges we face when traditional diplomatic channels are insufficient, but military action would be premature or counterproductive. She paused, letting the implications settle. Based on your performance during the Persian Gulf incident, you've been selected to present a case study on intelligence-driven crisis resolution. The symposium takes place in 10 days at the Naval War College in Newport. My heart rate increased slightly, though I kept my expression neutral. Speaking at an international military conference was the kind of career opportunity that could change everything, the kind of recognition that usually went to officers with much more senior rank and political connections. That's an honor, Admiral. What specific aspects of the case study would you like me to focus on? The intersection of intelligence analysis and diplomatic psychology, how understanding adversary motivations can create opportunities for face-saving solutions that prevent escalation while achieving strategic objectives. Your audience will include flag officers from 12 nations, plus senior defense officials and academic experts in international relations. The weight of the opportunity was starting to sink in. This wasn't just a briefing or a routine presentation. This was a chance to influence military thinking at the highest levels of international military leadership, to share insights that could shape how international crises were handled for years to come. I'm honored by the selection, ma'am. I'll prepare a comprehensive analysis that highlights both the intelligence methodologies and the diplomatic considerations. Admiral Morrison smiled for the first time since I'd entered the room. Colonel, there's one more thing. The symposium includes a reception where attendees bring family members. It's considered part of the diplomatic component, an opportunity for informal relationship building that often proves as valuable as the formal sessions. Family members. The phrase hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I wasn't sure how to process. My family had no idea what I actually did for a living, let alone that I might be invited to represent my country at an international military conference. Admiral, my family's situation is complicated. They don't fully understand the nature of my work for obvious security reasons. I understand the challenges of maintaining operational security while maintaining family relationships, she replied diplomatically. However, the informal interactions at these events often provide unique intelligence opportunities. Casual conversations can reveal insights that formal meetings miss. Your judgment would be valuable in those contexts. She was offering me something unprecedented, a chance to be recognized publicly for work that had always been classified, to have my expertise acknowledged at the highest level of international military leadership, and to bring my family into a world they'd never imagined I inhabited. but it also meant revealing truths that would fundamentally change their understanding of who I was and what my life actually entailed. Once that door opened, there would be no closing it again. Ma'am, if I may ask, how much background information can be shared with family members attending the reception? General information about the symposium's focus and your role in presenting case studies. Nothing specific about operations or intelligence sources, obviously, but enough for them to understand that you're not just pushing paperwork at a desk job. The irony was almost overwhelming. After years of my father dismissing my career as meaningless government work, I was being offered the chance to show him and the rest of my family exactly what that work actually involved. The vindication I'd never asked for, but had sometimes privately craved, was being handed to me on a silver platter. Admiral, I need to consider how to approach this with my family. The security requirements, the travel logistics, the suddenness of the invitation, it may be challenging to arrange on short notice. Of course, take the time you need to sort out the family arrangements. Just let my office know by Friday so we can finalize the guest list and security clearances for the reception. As I left the meeting, my mind was racing with possibilities and complications in equal measure.
The professional opportunity was extraordinary, but the personal implications were staggering. How do you suddenly explain to your family that the daughter they thought was a minor government clerk was actually being invited to address an international gathering of military leaders? I drove home through the Virginia countryside, passing the same cherry trees I'd noticed after Victoria's baby shower. The blossoms were gone now, replaced by fresh green leaves that signaled the full arrival of spring. Everything was changing, including, apparently, my own carefully constructed separation between professional achievement and family understanding. My phone rang as I pulled into my apartment complex parking lot. Victoria's name appeared on the display. "Sophia, how are you? I was just thinking about you and wondering if you'd heard about Dad's news." "What news?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. "He's been asked to speak at the Chamber of Commerce annual dinner next month. Something about successful business practices and community leadership. You know how proud he gets about these things." Dad's speaking engagement at a local business dinner. Meanwhile, I was being invited to address senior military officers from 12 nations about international crisis management. The contrast would have been funny if it wasn't so perfectly representative of our family dynamics. "That's wonderful for him," I said, genuinely meaning it. Dad had worked hard to build his real estate business, and recognition from the Chamber of Commerce was meaningful in his world. "He's been practicing his speech for weeks. Mom says he's driving her crazy running through it at dinner every night. But you know Dad, when he gets excited about something, he can't help but share it with everyone." I knew exactly what she meant. Dad's enthusiasm for his achievements was part of what made his dismissal of my career so painful. He understood the value of recognition and accomplishment. He just couldn't see it in what I did. "Victoria, can I ask you something? Hypothetically, if I had an opportunity to bring family to a work event, would you and Marcus be interested? It would be out of town, probably require travel, and it might change how you think about what I do for a living." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That sounds mysterious. What kind of work event?" "I can't go into details until I know if it's even possible to arrange, but it would be educational. You might discover that my job is more interesting than you've assumed." "Sophia, are you okay? You sound different, almost like you're planning something." She wasn't wrong. For the first time in my adult life, I was considering deliberately revealing the truth about my career to my family. Not because I needed their approval or validation, but because I'd been given an opportunity to show them a part of my world that might help them understand why I'd chosen this path. "I'm fine. Just think about it, okay? I'll call you back in a day or two with more details if it works out." After ending the call, I sat in my car for several minutes, watching other residents of the apartment complex return from their normal jobs to their normal lives. Most of them probably went to work in offices where they could talk freely about their projects, bring family members to company events, and post photos on social media without worrying about operational security. I envied them sometimes, but not enough to change careers.
The work I did mattered in ways that most jobs never could, even if the satisfaction had to remain largely private. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and began making lists. On one side, the logistical requirements for bringing family members to the symposium, security clearances, travel arrangements, hotel accommodations, and appropriate briefings about what they could and couldn't discuss. On the other side, the personal implications, explaining years of deception about my actual responsibilities, managing their reactions to learning what I really did, dealing with the aftermath of their adjusted perceptions. The logistics were manageable. I had contacts who could expedite security clearances, and the Navy would handle travel and accommodation arrangements for official guests. The personal implications were much more complex. How do you tell your father, who has spent decades dismissing your career as meaningless paperwork, that you've actually been managing international crises and military operations? How do you explain to your mother, who worries about your unmarried status and empty social calendar, that you've been too busy preventing wars to focus on dating? How do you help your pregnant sister understand that your boring government worker sister actually lives in a world of classified briefings and national security decisions? By Friday morning, I had made my decision. I called Admiral Morrison's office and confirmed that I would be bringing guests to the symposium reception. Then I called my parents' house in Charlotte. Chen residence? Linda speaking. Mom's voice was cheerful, probably because she was expecting a call from Victoria about baby preparations. Hi, Mom. It's Sophia. Is Dad available? I need to talk to both of you about something. Of course, dear. Let me get him. James, Sophia's on the phone and wants to talk to both of us. I heard rustling as the phone was passed to Dad, followed by the click of Mom picking up the extension in the kitchen. What's going on, Sophia? Everything okay with work? Dad's voice carried the slightly impatient tone he used when discussing my career, as if he was prepared to offer quick advice about office politics or time management. Actually, that's what I'm calling about. I've been invited to speak at a military conference next week, and family members are invited to attend a reception as part of the event. I'd like you both to come, along with Victoria and Marcus, if they're interested. Silence on both ends of the line. I could practically hear them trying to process what I'd said. Military conference? Mom asked. Sophia, you work for the Department of Defense, not the military itself. It's complicated, Mom. There's a lot about my job that I haven't been able to explain because of security requirements. This conference would help you understand what I actually do. Security requirements? Dad's voice sharpened with interest. What kind of security requirements? I took a deep breath.
This was the moment of truth, the point where I either committed to revealing everything or found a way to deflect and maintain the status quo. Dad, I'm not just a government clerk who files reports and attends meetings. I'm a colonel in military intelligence. The work I do involves analyzing threats to national security and coordinating responses to international crises. The conference is being held at the Naval War College, and I'll be presenting a case study to senior military officers from NATO countries. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock in their living room ticking, the sound of a lawnmower starting up somewhere in their neighborhood, but nothing from either of my parents. Sophia, Mom said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, are you saying you're actually in the military? Like, with a rank and everything? Yes, Mom. I've been a commissioned officer for 12 years. I started as a second lieutenant after college and worked my way up. Most of what I do is classified, which is why I've never been able to talk about it in detail. Colonel, Dad said slowly, testing the word. That's a pretty senior rank, isn't it? It's field-grade officer level. I supervise intelligence operations and coordinate with senior leadership on matters affecting national security. Another long pause. I could almost hear their worldview adjusting, like tectonic plates shifting to accommodate new geological realities. The Persian Gulf situation a few weeks ago, I continued, deciding to provide concrete examples. The one where an Iranian submarine crew was rescued through international cooperation,
I was part of the team that coordinated that operation. You were involved in that? Dad's voice had changed completely, losing its dismissive edge and taking on something I'd never heard before: genuine respect. I helped develop the strategy that allowed everyone to save face while ensuring the submarine crew survived. It's the kind of work I do regularly, just usually without any public attention. Mom made a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh. Sophia, why didn't you ever tell us? We've been thinking you worked at some boring desk job filing paperwork and going to pointless meetings. Because most of what I do is classified. I couldn't explain the real nature of my work without violating security protocols. It was easier to let you think I had a boring job than to try to describe what I actually do without being able to provide any details. And this conference, Dad asked, you're speaking to military officers from other countries? Senior military leadership from 12 NATO allies and strategic partners. The topic is intelligence-driven crisis resolution and international cooperation in complex security environments. The pride in his voice when he responded was unmistakable. My daughter, the colonel, addressing an international military conference. My daughter, the colonel. Not my daughter, the government clerk, not my daughter with the boring desk job, but my daughter, the colonel. The recognition I'd craved for years was finally happening, even if it came 20 years later than I would have preferred. So, you'll come? I asked. The conference is next week in Newport, Rhode Island. The Navy will handle travel and accommodation arrangements. Of course we'll come, Mom said immediately. Victoria and Marcus too, if the baby allows it. We wouldn't miss this for the world. Just remember, most of what I do is still classified. The reception will give you a general sense of my professional world, but I still can't discuss specific operations or intelligence sources. We understand, Dad said. Sophia, I owe you an apology. All these years, I thought you were settling for less than your potential. I had no idea you were serving your country at such a high level. The apology landed with more impact than I had expected. Years of accumulated hurt began to dissolve, replaced by something I hadn't felt in my relationship with my parents for decades: mutual respect. After ending the call, I immediately dialed Victoria's number. Sophia, Mom just called and told me the most incredible story. She said you're actually a colonel in the military and you're speaking at some kind of international conference? Please tell me this isn't some elaborate joke. It's not a joke, Victoria. I really am a colonel and I really am speaking at the Naval War College next week. I know it's a lot to process. Process? Sophia, I'm pregnant and emotional, and you just turned my entire understanding of your life upside down. How long have you been in the military? 12 years, since right after college graduation. 12 years, she repeated the number like she was trying to make it make sense. All this time, when we thought you worked some boring government job, you were actually… What exactly? What does a colonel in military intelligence actually do? I gave her the same general explanation I'd given our parents, emphasizing the international cooperation and crisis management aspects while avoiding classified details. The Persian Gulf submarine rescue. You were really involved in that? I helped coordinate the response, yes. And the work emergency that called you away from my baby shower? Was that some kind of international crisis too? I can't discuss the details, but yes, it was a time-sensitive situation that required immediate attention. Victoria was quiet for several seconds. Sophia, I feel terrible.
All those times Dad made jokes about your paperwork, all those times we treated your job like it was meaningless. You were actually out there protecting people, making a real difference, and we had no idea. You couldn't have known. I wasn't allowed to tell you. But we could have been more supportive without knowing the details. We could have trusted that you knew what you were doing with your life, instead of assuming you were settling for mediocrity. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Victoria asking dozens of questions I could only partially answer. But the tone had fundamentally shifted. Instead of talking to her disappointing sister who'd never achieved anything notable, she was talking to a colonel who had been invited to address an international military conference. The transformation was everything I'd imagined it would be, and somehow less satisfying than I'd expected. The validation felt good, obviously, but it was accompanied by a strange sense of loss. For 12 years, my family's ignorance of my real career had protected me from their expectations and judgments. Now that protection was gone, replaced by a new set of assumptions about who I was and what my life entailed. The week leading up to the symposium passed in a blur of briefing preparation, security clearance processing for my family members, and travel arrangements. I worked with Admiral Morrison's staff to develop a presentation that would be informative without revealing classified information, educational without compromising operational security. The case study focused on the psychological and diplomatic aspects of crisis de-escalation, using the Persian Gulf incident as an example of how understanding adversary motivations could create opportunities for face-saving solutions. I prepared slides that showed decision-making timelines, communication strategies, and outcome analyses without revealing specific intelligence sources or methods. On the day before travel, I called each family member to review security protocols and appropriate behavior at the reception. No photos of military personnel without permission, no questions about classified operations, no social media posts about the event until after it concluded. They all agreed readily, still adjusting to the idea that such precautions were necessary in my professional world. The Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, occupied a campus that felt like a cross between an elite university and a military installation. Historic brick buildings housed classrooms and lecture halls where the next generation of military leaders studied strategy and international relations. The harbor beyond the campus gleamed with the white hulls of sailing yachts and the gray profiles of naval vessels. My family arrived the evening before the symposium, wide-eyed and clearly out of their element, but trying hard to appear comfortable. Dad kept straightening his tie and looking around as if he expected someone to challenge his right to be there. Mom clutched her purse tightly and spoke in hushed tones appropriate for a library or church. Victoria, now 8 months pregnant and moving carefully, stared at everything with obvious amazement. "Sophia, this place is incredible. I had no idea military education looked like this." "The War College trains senior military officers and civilian defense officials," I explained, as we walked toward the Officers Club where the welcome reception was being held. "It's considered one of the premier institutions for advanced military education." The reception was already underway when we arrived, with officers from multiple countries mingling in dress uniforms that represented the diversity of NATO's military alliance. I spotted American Navy dress blues, British Army red tabs, German Luftwaffe silver pleating, and French naval gold trim among the crowd. Admiral Morrison approached as soon as she saw us, extending a warm welcome to my family and making the kind of gracious small talk that put nervous civilians at ease. She explained the symposium's focus and my role in the proceedings, emphasizing the honor of being selected to present to such a distinguished international audience. Colonel Chen's expertise in intelligence-driven crisis resolution has impressed senior leadership across multiple commands, she told my parents. Her analytical approach and diplomatic insights have prevented several potential international incidents from escalating into serious conflicts. Dad stood a little straighter at her words, his chest puffing with obvious pride. "We're very proud of Sophia's service," he said, using a tone I'd never heard him direct at anything related to my career. The evening continued with introductions to officers from various countries, each interaction reinforcing the professional respect I'd earned through years of work my family had never understood. A British brigadier mentioned reading my intelligence assessments on Eastern European security issues. A Canadian colonel asked about my approach to interagency coordination during complex operations. A German admiral complimented my analysis of maritime threat patterns. Each conversation was a small revelation for my family, building a picture of professional competence and international recognition that contradicted everything they'd assumed about my career. I watched their faces change as they realized that their disappointing daughter was actually regarded as an expert by military professionals from around the world. The transformation was complete by the time we returned to the hotel that evening. Dad, who had spent years dismissing my work as meaningless paperwork, was now telling anyone who would listen that his daughter was a colonel in military intelligence. Mom, who had worried about my unmarried status and empty social calendar, now understood why I'd been too busy to focus on dating. Victoria, who had pitied my boring government job, was amazed to discover that her sister was trusted with national security decisions. The next morning's presentation went better than I had dared hope. My analysis of the Persian Gulf crisis resonated with an audience that understood both the military complexity and diplomatic sensitivity involved in international crisis management. The questions afterward were insightful and professional, focusing on methodological approaches and strategic considerations rather than operational details. Admiral Morrison's closing comments included specific praise for my presentation and its insights into the intersection of intelligence analysis and diplomatic psychology. Several foreign officers approached afterward to discuss potential collaboration on similar challenges their countries faced. As we prepared to leave Newport, Dad pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Sophia, I owe you more than just an apology," he said, his voice serious. "I owe you an acknowledgement. All these years, I thought success looked like business achievements and community recognition. I couldn't see that what you were doing was more important than anything I've ever accomplished. Dad, your work matters too. Building a successful business, providing jobs, contributing to the community, those things have value." "They do," he agreed. "But protecting our country, preventing wars, saving lives, that's service at a level I never understood. I'm proud of you in ways I never knew were possible." The flight back to Charlotte was filled with excited conversation about the symposium, the other attendees, and the professional world they'd never imagined I inhabited. Victoria peppered me with questions about my career progression, my future plans, and whether I ever regretted choosing military service over a more conventional path. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was talking to family members who truly saw me, who understood that my choices had been deliberate and meaningful rather than settling for mediocrity. The validation was profound, but it came with the realization that their previous dismissal had been based on ignorance rather than judgment. They hadn't rejected who I really was. They'd never known who I really was. As we landed in Charlotte and prepared to return to our separate lives, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us to this point. A baby shower dismissal had led to a crisis management opportunity that had led to international recognition that had finally allowed my family to understand my true worth. But the most important realization was that their recognition, while gratifying, didn't change who I was or the value of what I did. For 12 years, I had served my country with distinction whether my family understood it or not. Their approval was welcome, but it wasn't necessary for my work to have meaning. The real victory wasn't their belated recognition. It was the quiet satisfaction of work that mattered, service that protected people who would never know they needed protection, and the professional respect of colleagues who understood the stakes involved in preventing international crises. As Dad had said at the reception, I was Colonel Chen now, not just to my family, but to myself. The recognition was nice, but the service had always been its own reward. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.